next we will turn to agenda item 5, which is a presentation on the WMATA safety situation, and it is our pleasure to welcome Jim Sullivan, who's Vice President of the Capital Program Management, and Corey Guff, Vice President of Project Development and Implementation Planning, both with WMATA. So at this time, I will turn it over to Mr. Mokhtari. Welcome, Mr. Mokhtari.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of Council. My name is Farmaz Mokhtari. I'm with the Department of Public Works, Traffic and Transportation Division. In January, Mayor and Council sent a letter to WMATA asking about safety of the riders during pandemic and Metro's overall plans to promote transit ridership as our regions recovers. Tonight, as you mentioned, Mr. Jim Solomon, Vice President, Vice President, Capital Program Management, Mr. Charlie Scott, Senior Government Relations Officer for Maryland, and Corey Guff, Vice President, Project Development and Implementation Planning, are with us to make a presentation and would answer any question you might have. At this time, I turn it over to either Mr. Scott or Mr. Solomon or Mr. Guff.
Good evening, council members. Thank you for having us here today to do this presentation. Our presentation tonight is on our capital planning, programming, budgeting, and execution process. And I'm here with my colleague, Corey Guff, who is in charge of project execution planning. So we can start with the presentation if someone can bring that up.
Who needs to have presenter rights?
Mr. Sullivan, James Sullivan.
Actually, I was told that it was already loaded, or no? I can try to have someone from my team. Peter, are you on? Can you bring up the presentation?
Sure, it's actually not letting me share the presentation at the moment.
I think we talked to someone from the council team that had.
If not, I can share it my screen.
Okay, great, thank you.
If I'd be given the ability to share, please.
Alrighty. Okay. Already, we could start. Next slide, please. We're here to talk about capital programming for WMATA's capital program. Next slide, please. Our capital program consists of a 10-year plan, which is at $23 billion. We have a 6-year program that is at $12 billion, and our annual budget for capital is $2.3 billion. And this is just for capital projects. This is not for operating dollars for WMATA. Next slide, please. Okay. Oh, whoop. All righty. The next slide here is this is our capital program. As I said, it's a 10-year and a 6-year and a 1-year. All of our capital programming documents are out on the WMATA website. They show all of our projects that are scheduled over the next 10 years, as well as those that are more formally developed for the 6-year period, and what our financial forecasts are for capital for the next year. The board just approved, the WMATA board last week approved the 2023 capital program. So what is out on our website is what is now approved. The final board budget will be published in July, but it remains the same that was submitted earlier this fall. Next slide. Can everyone see the slide? I know I'm really small. I can't really see it. Okay, good. I should know these slides by heart. This here shows our 10-year program. So you can see the first 6 years are over to the left to the dotted line, and that shows about a $2 to $3 billion program coming in each of the next 5 or 6 succeeding capital fiscal years. And then the last section is composes our 10-year program, which shows the expected activity over the last 5 years of our program for a total of 10. I just wanted to point out in the blue box over on the right, these are all the needs that we know that fit within the 10 years. But over to the right, you can see there are significant long-term capital investments that will be required to be funded over the period of time, some past the 10-year window. For example, our new comms and communication system for our train system. We will be at some point soon. We are looking at the technology, but we will be putting a new technology to replace the communication and comm system for our trains that dates back to the 70s. So that is one large investment, as well as some of the others in that blue box that are not included in those numbers over the 10-year. As we get closer and refine those requirements, we will then put those in and program them over the succeeding 10-year period of time. So each year we add an additional year to our 10-year period as we move down the road in terms of our investments. So some of those in the blue box will be added over time. There are small pieces of those in the earlier years, but we will add those over time. The next slide, please. This is just a different cut of the same numbers, just to give you a different flavor. You can see them. These are our budget categories established by our board. And you can see what is in the 23 budget, what is in the 6-year budget, that at the bottom there, you can see. And then in the last right-hand column is the totals over that 6-year period of time, just to give you a flavor for how much is invested in different categories. This chart here, if people find this kind of a good point of reference, I won't read all of these, but you can see on the rail side, there are significant investments that needed to be made in those categories over time. And this is what is included in our 6-year capital program to date. So we have funding over the 6-year period for this. And you can see all of the rail operations on the left and all of the rail components and the major investments that need to be made and will be made over the 6-year period of time. In the middle column, you have our bus and paratransit program, very important programs to WMATA. You can see improvements in the bus program in terms of additional buses, zero emission buses, renovations to our bus facilities, bus garages, bus shelters throughout the system, as well as other bus technology that's needed. And then on the right, we have our operational administrative support functions. We're in the process of looking at moving to a much more automated administrative support system to reduce our cost, looking at replacing our financial system, replacing our procurement system. Many of these date back many, many years, and over time they will be needed to be replaced. So that's kind of that category of support function on the right. Next slide, please. This here shows kind of, we had questions that people said they had an interest in looking at what our procurement process and what our overall life cycle process is. So it starts out with the first category or first stop is we identify the need. In this, we have an extensive series of meetings with all of our program officials. This usually happens in the spring and fall of every year, similar to your budget process, I assume, where we sit down and identify what are the needs that you have in your area, whether it's bus, transit, access, financial systems, IT, the whole 9 yards, we do that. And then we look at aligning those and defining those in terms of the scope of what those programs and projects are. And we work with folks over the succeeding 6 to 8 months to do that. We then put together our budget request that is then submitted to the board, and the board approves our budget request or amends it or adjusts it, just as you may adjust what comes from the executive branch here to see what the council, and in this case, the board, is comfortable with. And once that is done, and we will do development of implementation planning, where we sit down and make sure that the project manager has been identified, that we have clear milestones, for example, for design, construction, and operation of the assets we're bringing on board. And then we monitor those over time. It goes through the procurement process where it's executed whether that be a construction or a acquisition of a equipment, facilities, and so forth. And then at the top, we do reporting on that to our board and to the public on that. So it's kind of that circular life cycle that we have that we go through each year that produces the documents that you see on our website, whether it be the 1 year, the 6 year, or the 10 year. Next slide. Again, capital, we referenced earlier on that we do needs identification. So we meet with all of our engineers, operations, maintenance people, and other internal stakeholders to find out what their capital needs are. Annually, this investment, what their needs are ongoing and what existing ones that they have. Existing ones that have been started in prior years are validated to make sure, in effect, we don't need to change course or changes in the projects need to be made due to changes in our operations, maintenance, or if there are additional safety issues that have been identified. Then we make sure that the need is strategically aligned and approved so that it's included with a clear definition of scope, schedule, and cost. And the needs are transitioned to a discrete project. So we identify need, then we build a project, and then we execute it. Next slide, please. This kind of gives you just a little idea of what the capital planning and programming functions are over on the left, which we kind of talked about alignment and development of the budget and the cost estimates. And then on the right is the capital program delivery function, which Corey Cuff, if she is on tonight, I know she's having some technical difficulties getting on, but that's more of the functions that happen on the right-hand side of that chart, where we do the implementation planning, we do the execution, and move to procurement. Next slide, please. Okay, Corey, are you on?
I am here, Jim.
Okay, it's all yours.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for having us here tonight. I'm going to focus, as Jim mentioned, on the delivery side of our project development process. Right now, in our capital program delivery team, we have over 200 projects underway. These projects include some of the ones that Jim mentioned in his presentation, and they span across all of our asset types, including systems, infrastructure, and communications. After Jim's team figures out the viability of a need, it's up to us to kind of figure out how it gets executed. We work on the delivery side where we figure out the what, how, and when, and thus this begins our project development and implementation planning. So if we could just stay on this slide for a couple more seconds, please. So we basically look at the totality of the need. We seek out common denominators, such as the appropriate differences between the different types of assets, how they work together, this system condition, the asset type, the location, the proximity, service considerations, constructability factors, commercial viability, and market industry trends. These are the things that we look at as we start to bundle our projects. So we're taking those needs, we're looking at those common factors, we're putting together packages that make sense, and then we're moving on to deciding what the delivery mechanism will be. In our case, from a delivery standpoint, we typically use either design, bid, build, or CMAR. Most recently, we launched a CMAR project on our Yellow Line Bridge and Tunnel and Bridge Rehabilitation Project, which is currently underway now. We haven't started construction yet, but it's one of the newest forms of delivery mechanisms and strategies that we're using today. Next slide, please. So after that's all over, we end up with a baseline document that basically determines what our scope, schedule, budget, our preliminary risk mitigations, cash flows, delivery methodology, anticipated project outcomes, and performance requirements. These are all documented, and we establish the project team that's accountable for the delivery of that particular effort. Although there are multiple factors that we consider during the evaluation and development process, these three are the top three that we look at. safety, customer service, and stakeholder impacts, and execution efficiencies. Next slide, please. From a safety standpoint, we want to make sure that all our projects can be executed in a safe manner that don't affect our employees, our riders, our contracts in any adverse way. We're trying to make sure that our systems and operations and equipment can function safely during execution. We also want to make sure that the communities that surround us are protected also when we do these projects. Next slide, please. So from a customer perspective, we want to make sure we minimize impacts, right? So we look at the travel patterns of our customers. We try to figure out ways to continue a one-seat ride if they're typically used to that. But in many cases, that's not a viable option considering the condition of our track configurations. And I'll talk a little bit about that more in a little bit. But we do our best to try to minimize disruption to customers, and we try to provide alternatives that seek to give them a similar experience, but perhaps not the same experience that they're used to. Next slide, please. So as I was starting to allude to in the previous slide, the operational considerations. So unlike our counterparts in other parts of the world and even in the United States, we only have 2 tracks on our system. And so it is kind of constraining from a track perspective when we're trying to do construction projects in that environment, because we only have one way a train can go on either one of those tracks. And in some instances in other facilities and other properties, they may have 4 tracks, they may have 6 tracks, but they have enough capacity to reroute their tracks and their trains to accommodate construction efforts that are a little less disruptive in compared to our situation. So when we're looking at those operational considerations, we're working very closely on trying to minimize these impacts to customers, as I mentioned earlier, looking at the system structure and trying to figure out a way to offer alternatives to our current operating environment. We look at service parameters. So for us, the time that we have to work is most viable and is most preferred is the overnight, right? It's the least impactful to our customer. This is when our system is not running, where no revenue service is running. And so that's usually kind of where we'd like to go. Unfortunately, that's not always the best option depending on the project, because the hours that are available may not be enough to set up, break down, get the work done, and make the project activities be productive. We also have what's called early out, where we will allow, we'll reroute some of the revenue service to allow for our construction crews to go out a little earlier than the overnights. But again, that has some limitations too, and it does also have customer impacts. So we also have some other options that we take advantage of depending on the nature of the project. Those include single tracking. So we just take one track out of service and we run trains on another track. There's another option called skip station stops, which we will just skip around a station using maybe a bus shuttle or something like that. And then we have what we call service adjustments, where we have complete kind of system shutdowns in a particular area. And that enables us typically to get the most production out of a crew. And it also has the advantage of minimizing the time and impact that we have on the system. Unfortunately, it's not always the most preferred option for customers. It can be a lot different of an experience because we're shuttling customers and providing bus bridges from certain points along the rail line. But at the end of the day, from a productivity perspective and impact on riders, it's like one of those things where it's immediately hard at first, but you know it's quick and it's over, and then you know we're out of there a lot quicker. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about the functional alignment of how this all works out organizationally. We have a team that's assigned to work on that early project delivery development discussion that I had earlier with you. And that team is responsible for putting together those documents that define what our scope, schedule, and budget is, and what they're going to be. Then we have our constructability and access planning team. They're looking at the various configurations that we have out there so that we can minimize the disruption to our customers. And they're actually looking at, how do we plan our projects, not in this year only, but year 6, year 7, year 8, and beyond. And then we have our alternative delivery team that's looking at, other opportunities for us to work with industry and to determine different ways of pursuing projects, looking at trying to bring in new vendors and new commercial enterprises to work with us on these projects. And they're also looking at industry trends to determine what's the best time to put a project forward. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jim, and happy to answer any questions you have when we open up the discussion. Thank you.
Just a summary, kind of to put it in perspective, that we're planning to spend over $12 billion over the next 6 years to improve safety, security, and reliability of our assets and to reach a good state of repair for all of our moving stock and all of our infrastructure. It's an ambitious program that we've put together. We believe we've identified a significant majority of our needs over the 6-year period and the 10-year period. It's all in the documents that are referenced here on the WMATA website. Appreciate people's interest in that. And, I couldn't let this presentation end without thanking the regional partners, and you're one of them, clearly, for their support for the capital program. We really are trying to reach a state of good repair and make up for a lot of the investment that was waning over the years. So we are moving forward on this, and we appreciate your support in doing this. And that is the end of our presentation. Corey and I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have or any comments you want to make. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Sullivan, and Ms. Cuff for coming in today. And Mr. Scott, I apologize. You're not on my list. I didn't realize you were here, Charlie. So thank you also for keeping us informed on things. Thank you for this. And I do know that you all have struggled with whether the financing is going to come through every time. That's been a big issue and whatnot. So we appreciate the challenges that you face and are very grateful that you're here with us this evening. I'm going to turn it first to Councilmember Dr. Miles. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. And I echo the comments of our mayor. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules. I know you all are up to your eyeballs in projects and requests. And I do recognize that safety is important to you all as it is to us. One of the overarching questions I have with regard to capital projects and their planning is, to what extent has there been discussions about building in some flexibility into the schedule? What do I mean by this? So essentially, if there's a drop in ridership, as we saw, for example, at the beginning of the pandemic, is there a way to fast track projects that could cause significant disruptions? As an example, if there's we'll just use Rockville as an example. We had a station closure, so that there could be some improvements to the signage and the things where you scan your card in. Perhaps it would have been awesome if that occurred earlier during this pandemic, when there's like one person per car, as opposed to later on when ridership upticked. So again, the general question is, to what extent can projects that cause significant disruptions, is there flexibility, or is there any thoughts about building in some flexibility into those timelines? Thank you.
Corey, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. Happy to take that one. Thank you, Councilman. That's a really good question. And to be transparent about this, we actually tried to do that during the pandemic and tried to increase our activities on the track and our construction projects for those that were shovel ready. Some of them, because we didn't know that the pandemic was coming, we just didn't have projects ready to work on, and we were kind of working at our normal pace. But we did increase a lot of our projects during the pandemic when the ridership was lower. We were deliberate with that. Unfortunately, in the case that you just mentioned, it wasn't one that we were prepared to do at that time. But we do appreciate and really did try to take advantage as much as we could when we did have the lower ridership. And we continue to do that as the ridership rebounds.
I appreciate your candor in the reply. I recognize that early in the pandemic, none of us knew how to adjust, whether it was safe to bring employees together in the same space to perform needed repairs. I recognize that. I would just, I don't need to tell you all how to do your jobs, but I would recommend that, moving forward, we're dealing with our own sort of capital improvement projects, as you will find out later on in our budget discussions. But perhaps if there could be a way to be even more nimble moving forward, I think would be helpful for everybody, not just Rockville. The only other follow-up question or point that I'll mention is that I've been riding Metro since about January 2020, every day when I would go to work. And one of the things mentioned in the topic or in the agenda book was that some of the things with regard to safety and mask wearing, that there were transit officers passing masks out to people who weren't wearing them. Now, I ride between 7 and 9 in the morning and between 4 and 6 in the evening, and I've not once seen a transit officer handing out a mask. I haven't seen many transit officers whatsoever. So I'm curious where those are. I think that'd be a great idea. I do not think that punishing people for failure to wear masks, arresting folks, that we don't need any of that. But I have been concerned for some time, as have others, that while there is a federal mask mandate to be worn on public transportation, that there's a lack of enforcement. That's all I have.
Councilman, thank you so much for being patient with us and recognizing that we have some room for improvement in terms of nimbleness. We could most certainly do better there. And we are learning from this, and hopefully what we've learned, we will never have to experience again, because we will not have another pandemic. But obviously there's some work to do there. I personally am not familiar with the issue that you're talking about regarding our police officers and handing out the mask. I know that was a expectation that we had up there, and I'm sad to hear that you have not seen that. And so what we will do is we will take that feedback back to our chief of police and make him aware that that concern was raised today, and we will ask him to address it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. That's all.
Thank you. Councilmember Prashela.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. But what's really obvious in your presentation is just how massive the system really is. I don't know how many stations and how many cars and how many people, but it's really a massive operation with many moving parts, and I can imagine that it's difficult to coordinate all that, keep everybody happy. I used to ride Metro a lot, probably for more than 25, 30 years, not so much lately. But I do have one question, and that is, if you all had your druthers, how much more money per year would you like to have in order to get your capital program accomplished in a reasonable period of time? And it just looks to me like you have so many things to do, and even in your 10-year plan, you're not getting to them all. What do you really need in order to do it? Maybe I'm putting you on the spot, but now's your time to put it out there.
Sure. If you look on there, I think the slide showed about 20 some odd billion was the amount that was requested between the 6 and the 10. And then there's amounts after that, probably another $3 or $4 billion. But I think the real issue when we talk about this is our ability to execute as we go along and still keep the system operational. Even if we had, for example, all of the money to move to a computer-based signaling system, which is what a lot of European transit systems have started to move to, For us to move to that is going to take a phased approach over a long period of time because we don't have the luxury to shut the entire system down. The same thing, for example, more routinely would be our bus garages. We know we have 4 or 5 bus garages that need to be replaced. We can't do them all at once because then we would have nowhere to run the buses out of. So we're doing things in a throughput fashion where we take 1 or maybe 1.5 at a time to move forward, even though we have 5 or 6 to do. So that is really the constraint on our throughput of the system while we still keep operations running. So as we move, our approach is as we move each year down, we can have a better clue of what those things will be. But I believe right now our estimate that we have given the board is somewhere plus 20+ billion over that 10-year period of time.
Thank you. That's a very good answer. However, if you add another $500 million per year, maybe you could find a way to spend that and get it more efficient.
Yeah, some of the challenges that we are faced with, like you are faced with right now, is the cost of capital improvements are significantly higher than anyone ever anticipated. So, we are still, if they will, as Corey will tell you, fighting that battle to try and make the costs as reasonable as possible. But those costs are increasing over time, just to the current environment. So we're having to deal with that as well as identifying additional needs as we go along. As we bring the system into a better state of good repair, we're identifying additional items that need to be funded. So we could have, pledged to the board that we will continually update our 6 and 10-year and our 10-year plus every year as we make progress and as we identify things. As you know, in local government, things change and requirements are adjusted over time, and we are continually striving to do that. Part of, I think, what we have done in the last year is the first time we've ever had a 10-year plan out for the public to be able to see in great detail. Before that, we never did it. And if you, have time, my friends who are budget geeks will look at this and look at the appendix that we have put out there in our 10-year plan. We have tried to list every single need and project that is out there, so we are completely transparent about what's going on and how big the issues are. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Councilmember Ashton.
As my colleagues say, we thank you for all that you've done. I know the system has gone through a whole lot in terms of disruption due to the pandemic, as well as having to manage a number of safety and upgrade issues. So thank you for your work. I did want to note for the public that the mayor and council did ask some very specific questions, and there's a Q&A included in the brief book, pages 18 through 20, with very in-depth answers. So I won't repeat those questions for the sake of time. But I did see in one of the responses that there was a plan to restore the 7,000 series and then use 6,000 series and get new trains on the tracks. I thought that in January there was a 90-day period. Where do we stand? Because I would assume that 90-day period would be coming to conclusion at this time. And if you could just let us know, has that been complete?
Council member, I believe we will need to take that back, and that's not in my particular area of responsibility, and I don't think it's in Ms. Cuff's either in terms of the schedule for the reintroduction of the 7,000 series. And I think Charlie's, I would be happy to get you the latest update on that for you, but that's not something that I have at this point.
And Jim, we did announce, I think just last week, that the next improvement is going to be continued work to get the 6,000 series rail cars inspected by the Washington Metro Rail Safety Commission and gets the remaining 6,000 series rail cars back into the fleet. We believe that in May timeframe, we'll start bringing the rest of the 6,000 series rail cars back. At the same time, we're still working with the WMSC on the plan for the testing of the 7,000 series rail cars. So we have not yet announced when those can come back.
Thank you. I did also want to thank, I know that there are probably other parts of the entity that have been working on this, but I wanted to thank you as well. I know that there was a recent announcement that there will be a reduction in late night fares as well as weekend fares. I think that would help to support especially some of our workers who need to get back and forth to work, and hopefully encourage folks to use the metro. So I thought that flat rate was a nice addition and supportive of restoring our economy. So I wanted to thank you for that.
Great, thank you. And one quick clarification, the weekend fare is already in place. The board did vote to continue that with our new fiscal year. And as you mentioned, the late night fare was also approved by the board. So that will go into effect around July 1st.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Feinberg.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I am one of those budget type geeks, so I'm very interested in your projects, and thank you very much for the PowerPoint. Do you track implementation rates on projects so that what was planned may not actually occur in any given year or 2 or 3 year period? Could be from things beyond your control. Clearly, both in getting equipment, parts, it could be you're hitting a lot more rock than you thought about. It could, many variables. Do you monitor implementation rates so that you can have lessons learned with other similar type projects is number one. And number two, do you track your cost estimates versus your actuals at different points in a project to get better and better at cost estimating? Because that's always a struggle in implementation.
Sure. Thank you, Councilwoman. That is those are really good questions. I'm pleased to share with you that we do those things. We do track our projects against plan. Part of what we talked about in the previous discussion was this accountability document that establishes what the baseline is for the project, scope, schedule, budget. And then as the project progresses through its life cycle, we track that plan against what we establish as that baseline document. And so that's your kind of your implementation and progression, et cetera, right? We also have on an individual project level, we have a monthly meeting where we're working on understanding what the impacts of a particular project are in terms of schedule, cost, et cetera, right? So if we see any kind of irregularities or discrepancies in what we thought should be happening versus what is happening, those are addressed at that time. Where we are getting better, and admittedly not 100% yet, is the exploration and then the sharing of lessons learned between different project organizations. So within our team, we're kind of set up by a portfolio. And so some teams have like just infrastructure, some teams have systems, some teams have mechanical. So it's kind of all over the place from that perspective. I mean, it makes sense from an asset class to group those teams together. But what sometimes is lost in that is the sharing of challenges. So that's where we're getting better at our lessons learned. In fact, I'm standing up or part of my organization. We just started this last year, just dedicated to making sure we have a robust lessons learned process so that we have a database where we're capturing all this information and then sharing it across the organization. I hope that helps to answer your question.
Yes, it does. And I'm just going to follow up with one other item. Do you have an MFD program or minority female disabled in your procurement aspects for your capital projects so that you hire MFD type firms or subs?
So we do have our disadvantaged business enterprise and we have our small business enterprise. And we are very deliberate in making sure that we hit certain targets from a disadvantaged business perspective. And then we also are formulating some of our projects to make sure that we have that small business component available so that small businesses have access to the same projects that some of the larger project companies would have. And as example, we just put together a strategy for our bus shelter program where we deliberately called out small business design firms and small business construction firms to support the advancement of that project. In terms of your specific question, I'm not aware of that particular program. I believe it would fall under our DBE program, but I don't want to mislead you tonight and say that it does. And so can we take that offline and get back to you with a specific answer?
Of course, and thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Sure, thanks.
I want to congratulate you on your recent announcement about the partnership with Hitachi Rail and building the facility in Hagerstown. I was at the Maryland Mayor's meeting last Thursday and Friday and spoke with Mayor Emily Keller, and they are thrilled, and we are thrilled to have the business building in Maryland, honestly. It's about 500 new jobs, so thank you, and congratulations on that, and hopefully that will help move things along too. So thank you for job creation in Maryland. Are there any other questions? Councilmember Ashton.
Just briefly, is there anything specific that you want to share with us about the metro stations in our jurisdictions or plans to move further north?
No plans to move further north. I can say that Corey just mentioned the bus shelter program. So at Rockville specifically, we do have plans to have the bus shelters installed later this year. During the shutdown for the canopy work, we did do some work to prepare the concrete. So we laid some conduit and things like that so that the area will be ready for when the shelters are ready to be installed later this year. So right now, the plywood shelters you see out there are just temporary. So they'll be replaced with the brand new shelters by the end of 2022.
That is great news. Thank you. And thank you also for your continuing partnership with us on a reimagine of the Rockville Town Center Station area. And we really are excited to work with you all going forward. I now, Councilmember Dr. Miles.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll keep it brief and quick. Is there anything that we can do, as Mayor and Council, the city, to help you with regard to your improvement projects, timelines, and things of that such?
Corey, any?
I'll take a stab at that. Thank you for the opportunity to share a thought. Just having the opportunity for open dialogue, talk to you, let you know what's going on, and get your advice sometimes when we have some questions on how to move a project forward. I think that would be helpful.
And I can't get the opportunity to go past to say the continued support of dedicated funding that we have from the jurisdictions is what is allowing our capital program to move forward. And that's absolutely critical to us and absolutely critical to have safe and reliable service by upgrading our assets and putting them in a state of good repair. A constant challenge after the many years where we hadn't. So it's something we're really trying to stress so that we do provide safe and reliable service throughout the rail and the bus system as well. So we're very appreciative of that. So continued support there is always welcome. So thank you.
Yeah, it's hard to plan for things when you don't have surety of your budget. So we will continue to work on that. And we had a question that came in about bike parking. So we'll hope that in the renovation of the existing station that there'll be a consideration for maybe a little bit more safe bike parking at the Rockville Town station. So just throwing that out there for an idea.
Sure. I believe we do have some efforts underway to replace our bike lockers and upgrade some of the bike U-rings that are out there with new ones.
Terrific.
But we can double check.
Thank you. Councilmember Dr. Miles?
I'm so sorry. You said bikes. It got me all excited. So I did reach out to Mr. Scott about a year or two ago when you all installed sort of like rain protectors over the bike rings, about half of them. That's super helpful. So I just want to thank you all again. It keeps me from having a wet seat when I ride home.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for coming in and sharing your evening with us, for all the work that you're doing to improve safety for everybody and for the continued success of Metro. We support you and will work closely with you. So thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight.
Likewise, thank you. Nice to meet you all.
Nice to see you too. Take care.
Good evening.
Bye-bye.